Hello YouTube and welcome to Dumpster Linux Part 2. It's going to be a bit of a long one, so if I make any fluff-ups, I'm going to have to beg your pardon because I haven't got the time to mess around, as you know. I'm trying to do these in one hit. So, if you're in Part 2, then you've already watched Part 1 and you'll know why we're here. Microsoft made a bit of a mess up with XP in that it lasted more than a decade. Their business ethos is to try and sell us operating systems. So, yeah, XP dented their bank account a bit. And that's where you're going to have to face up to something. Because as human beings, we want stability. We do whatever we can to avoid change. But in the technological industries, change is the constant. So you're going to have to get used to having to make decisions and affect changes and cope with changes indeed. XP is pretty much almost dead, about another year or two, and you know, I've got a number of people now who are having to face up to having to move to something else. A number of people are trying to grab hold and keep hold of Microsoft Vista of all things, but there's changes. I mean, I've had to redo a laptop just yesterday, and in order to get XP to work on it, I actually had to turn off many of the advanced features in the BIOS in order for Windows XP to install. So if we want to take advantage of the power of the processors and the machinery that we're getting, we're going to need to embrace that change and go forward with it. Only then will we get the best value for money out of the hardware. With dumpster machines, it's free anyway. And you're sort of bridging a gap, really, because many things now, this is at the end of 2012, or getting towards it, many things of the changes that have happened are starting to roll forward into another consistent future. And dealing with machines over the last few years, you're going to still have to deal with some of those inconsistencies. That's what you get for getting a dumpster machine. The best thing is to get nitty-gritty with the hardware. I mean, most of a PC is actually modular. You can change it relatively easily. It's just a matter of getting used to it, and that's the advantage of a dumpster machine. You don't have to care about breaking it too much. And once you actually take the lid off, you'll find that most of it is actually bits that you can unplug, swap out, plug the new bit in, and yada yada. You just got to know which plugs are which. There is a good book here, Haynes. Now, then, they're known in the UK as the Haynes Book of Lies because they started off as mechanics books, and they said, simply remove such and such a nut, and about 3 hours later you're still there trying to get the thing to budge, hitting it with a hammer. So they became known as the Book of Lies. And they've got a number of other ones out, and this is Build Your Own Computer. Now, I'm not actually going to give you the ISBN because this is only 4th edition. 5th edition was released sometime recently. Now, it's a reasonable book. It explains most things in plain English, and you can see by the orange marks that I really wanted to bring much of this book to you. I mean, the reasons. This is focused on building your own computer rather than a dumpster. So it's a good book to have if you want to get into this. The list price is £20 and $35. If you want to get an earlier edition like this, I'd say that 4th edition is the earliest that you want to go. Don't go any earlier than that, and try and pick it up as a bargain wherever you can. In other words, do a bit of searching, see if you can get hold of it. There's a couple of things that book, at least the 4th edition, doesn't mention. And that's something that you're going to need to know for dumpster machines. It's called the BIOS. Like you're used to a PC having an operating system. This is a dead board, by the way, hence I'm handling it with impunity. And that is that there is a basic input-output system, the BIOS, B-I-O-S, which starts the machine, and that is responsible for controlling the motherboard, controlling various options on it, and loading the operating system. It's the bit that happens before the operating system loads. And what a number of companies do is that they will password protect the BIOS to prevent their users changing the options. Because of viruses and all the rest of it these days, many corporations disable USB ports, they disable CD-ROMs, that sort of thing. So you need to be able to get rid of that. Now that's easier on desktops than it is on laptops, because there's this thing. You probably remember your electric clock. If you cut the power to it, it loses the time. But if there's a battery in it, it keeps the time. And that's the same with the various settings. Motherboards typically have a battery on like that. You know, that silver penny battery as they're called. Now, in order to clear the BIOS and clear these settings, it doesn't work in all machines because some of them don't have penny batteries. They have other devices, they have other capacitors. You typically need to disconnect the computer from the mains. If you've got it connected to the mains, then the motherboard is still receiving power, so that sort of defeats the object. So disconnect the mains. The next thing you probably need is a very small screwdriver or something, and you want to pop the battery off. I can't see what you're seeing, so you'll typically see a metal section, and you just put the screwdriver in. Can you see what I'm doing? I hope you can. Push that back, and the battery should just pop out. So you take the battery out. You have to be careful when, I'm sorry I'm doing this at an awkward angle. You'll be doing this with the PC actually, the motherboard actually in the computer, you know, so it'll be easier for you than it is for me. You'll now see two electrical contacts. We have one on the side and one on the base, and you want to use your screwdriver and short those contacts out. That will hold it for a few seconds. That will get rid of any stray voltage in the machine. And then just put the penny battery back in. If a computer starts up and it says that it's forgotten the BIOS settings, then typically this battery has run flat, and that's what you replace. Now, in most situations, that will clear the BIOS. That will clear, and then it should forget any password settings that are in it. So that's one way around that. It doesn't work in all cases, but that's the best you can do. The other one is the BIOS control itself. When you power on the machine, there will usually be a flash screen. What do they call it? Anyway, it's got the company's logo of the motherboard on it. It's pretty much the very first thing that comes up. If you don't power your monitor on until after the machine's on, or the monitor powers on at the same time that you power the computer on, then you can miss that screen because the monitor is still warming up. So have a warmed up monitor. And then you'll see something either on the bottom or the top that says Del to enter setup or F2 to enter setup. And in some cases it can be F9. In some cases, like ThinkPads, there are blue buttons that you've got to press when to get into setup. And then you'll typically get into a text screen. It won't respond to the mouse. Some do, some of the more modern ones do. But typically you've got to use the left, right, up, down arrows to go through your options, and I'll go through the BIOS at a later date in another video. But that's where various features are controlled. And you'll need, one of the most common things to do is to use the cursor buttons, go through this system, try and find load setup defaults or load optimized defaults, and that will save you a bit of work. You can just go for one of those options to load the setup defaults. I think it's usually F10 to accept and save. Have a look down the bottom of the screen and it will tell you the various buttons and what they do. So you want to save the settings, you want to go for that, load the defaults, save it, and boot the machine. Right. The other thing is hardware. Boot hardware. Boot choice, basically. As part of the BIOS startup, it will look for an operating system, and it will look in what's called the boot order. So you typically have a USB stick, a CD-ROM unit or DVD, network even, it can boot from the network, or the inbuilt hard drive, for example, or an external USB CD-ROM, or there's more options than that. But that's what it will try and do. It will try and look through things in that order, and typically you want the CD or USB before the hard disk, so that if you put a CD in which has an operating system, bingo, that'll do the job. Right, so if you're not used to the BIOS, then get hold of someone who is and get them to teach you, because it's a useful thing to learn, especially when you're dealing with dumpster computers. If you're dealing with a dumpster laptop and that kind of protection is on board, then you've got a bit more of a problem, because the laptops are harder to take apart and they're harder to get at that battery. Because even though you've got the big battery as part of the laptop, there is still another battery in there, and that one is actually more likely, in my personal experience, to be a capacitor. And in order to discharge the capacitor, it gets a bit messy. So if you're dealing with dumpster machines that are password protected, avoid the laptops if you can. Right, operating system. And again, this is where things will matter. Because a lot of systems, people see 64-bit processors and 32-bit processors. What's the difference? Well, to put it simply, imagine two computers. One computer can only add up one column of numbers at a time. The other can do two columns simultaneously. What's happened over processor history is, as they've gone on, they've not only gone on faster in terms of speed, but they've also gone on in terms of what it can actually do in any one tick, for example. So let's say this processor that can only handle one column of numbers at a time. During one operational phase, it will add these numbers. During a second operational phase, it will add these numbers. So it takes 2 ticks to do the sum. For the larger computer, it can do the whole thing in 1 tick. Therefore, if you take a 64-bit and a 32-bit computer, both running at, say, 2 gigahertz, then they will be running at the same speed. But if you're doing arithmetic which needs larger numbers, then the 64-bit processor will be able to handle larger numbers than the 32-bit processor. I know I'm simplifying this, but that's roughly the nuts and bolts. The 64-bit processor is better because it can process larger numbers in one shot. And when it comes to jobs that need larger numbers, the 32-bit processor will have to start dividing numbers and doing bits and pieces and then slotting the result together, and that's where the time is lost. Fundamentally, for most of our desktop usage, it won't matter very much. In the old days of 8-bit computers, it mattered greatly, and 16-bit consoles were an improvement, because an 8-bit could only handle a number between 0 to 255. When it came to handling more colours and the rest of it, that's where it hit the limit. You very soon reach 255 and you want to count beyond that, so you've then got to do this splitting up and so how do you tell the difference between a 64-bit and a 32? Well, a 64-bit processor, as you've probably guessed, will easily run a 32-bit operating system that's made for that series. However, it won't do it the other way around. So if you want to work out whether a computer is 64-bit or 32-bit and it doesn't say it on a label or anything, try loading a 64-bit operating system. If it works, it's a 64-bit computer. If it doesn't, then you're going to need a 32-bit version. And the decision between 64 and 32-bit is something that we'll come to later when it comes to choosing our operating system. Talking about choosing our operating system, there was a piece of paper. It's over there. Now this, like I said, you're going to have to get used to choice. And this is a list of 104 Linux distributions that are currently out there. And this is just the main top levels of most of them. And this is not a complete list either. So you've got to work out what the heck you're going to do, because there's a lot of Linux versions out there. And that again is another beauty of running a dumpster machine, because you can take your time, read reviews and all the rest of it, get people's advice, and get a couple of different versions of operating systems that you want to try. Then you can load them up and give them a shot and see what they're like. Some of these, in case you're wondering about dates, have been around longer than XP, so they actually have quite a history. Debian was first out in 1993, for example. OpenSUSE was out in 1994. Red Hat Linux was 1995. Slackware was 1993. SUSE itself was 1994. You know, so these operating systems have been around for a while. You're not just jumping into something that's fresh out. You know, there's quite a bit of a history here. We're talking coming up to 2 decades for some of these distributions. But I'm going to make the decision here to go for Ubuntu, and then I'm going to put Lubuntu on top of it. Sounds complicated. The reason I'm doing that is I want to show you some more of the choices that you're facing. Ubuntu has gone, as you probably know about Windows 8, it's got a really new interface that's very Marmite, and Ubuntu did that about a year or two ago with a desktop system called Unity. And again, it's very Marmite. Personally, I hate it, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't show you what it looked like and give you the chance to get a feel for it. You might prefer it, who knows. And then I'll go on to installing Lubuntu, which, if you prefer a more classic type of desktop, that's what it'll deliver for you. So, you've got your dumpster machine. You've got your BIOS sorted out, so you can boot from a CD. What you're now going to need is a copy of the operating system. So how do I get this to you? Well, you've probably done it already with other things. Let's say, for example, a picture. If I wanted to get this picture to you, I'd scan it in, usually as something like a JPEG.jpg, and I'd email you the file. You'd open the file and send it to your printer, and hey presto, you'd have a copy of the picture. Same thing principally with a CD. I can take a copy, an image of everything that's on the CD into a file, usually a .iso file, otherwise known as an ISO file, and I can get that ISO file to you. Once you have it, you can then burn that ISO file to a blank CD, and hey presto, you've got a copy of the CD. You can then put it in your dumpster Linux machine and it will boot. But if you think I'm getting you a copy of the ISO file, forget it. It's better for me to show you how to get the ISO files yourself and how to burn them out to a CD. One of the things you'll typically find is that each different build or flavor of Linux will come with its own website. This is the website for Ubuntu. www.ubuntu.com, and that's how you spell it, U-B-U-N-T-U. You'll typically find some link to download the files that you need, and you might have an option like this. We'll be looking for the desktop version, but there are other versions for server building or if you're into cloud infrastructure, but in our case we're just after a simple desktop. Here we go. And one of the key things you'll look for here is the LTS version. LTS stands for long-term support, and it's usually supported for something like about 3 years. Ubuntu should actually give you a warning when the next LTS version is out, and well, lately it's just been a case of hit a button and it'll do the upgrade for you. It's always wise before doing that though to make sure you've got a backup of your data just in case something goes wrong, although these days little has gone wrong, to be perfectly honest. Here you can see on the right that we're asked to choose our flavour, 32-bit or 64-bit. Now if you're in any doubt, go for the 32-bit. They're saying that this is recommended, and that's because the 32-bit version is typically worked on more. It's a bit complicated, but that's roughly the basis of it. So if you're in any doubt, go for the 32-bit, and it's more stable than the 64. That will tend to change in coming years when pretty much most of the machines out there are 64-bit as standard. If you're encountering a dumpster laptop, then it will probably be a 32-bit processor. Now if you want to download both of these, then be warned that these downloads are a bit of a size in themselves. typically about 700 meg. So if you're on a slow connection, you might want to do this overnight. Then you start your download, and it will download the ISO file. So make sure that you've got enough space on your hard drive to handle the 700 or 800 megabytes that it will download. Now there are other options, by the way. You don't have to run USB from a CD, Ubuntu from a CD rather. You could run it from a USB stick if you wanted, and there are instructions here to try it before you install it, or how to create a bootable USB stick on Windows. You might have to use a USB stick if you've got something like a netbook or a cut down laptop that hasn't got a CD or DVD-ROM drive, or if you're using an Eco PC like I am, and that hasn't got a CD-ROM drive. So there are instructions there on how to do it. There are other options. You can buy a CD if you want, if you don't want to download it for yourself. And there's a Windows installer version, which to be honest I've never actually looked into. But yeah, there's a lot of information there on that page for you to have a look at. Once you've got your image, you then need to use your burning software. Now I'm going to cancel that and go back to the main, and you'll see here we've got a number of options. Most people, when they're burning data to a CD, will use a data project option, whereby you just drag the files in and hit a button and it'll go off and make it. But we actually want to use a special option called burn image, and that is what we need to burn an ISO image to a disk. In some cases you'll find burn image under the tools option, or many other things like that, but here it's plain and simple and easy sight. So you select burn an image, then you select what image you want to burn, in this case our ISO that we downloaded, and it'll say OK, and it'll select a disk to write to. We hit burn, and that's it. Away it will go, and it will transfer that ISO file to the CD. Once that's finished, hey presto, we have our installable CD. Nice and easy when you know how. In part 3 of Dumpster Linux, we're going to do a couple of things. The first thing is I'm going to give you a look at one of the more traditional BIOSes, so you can get a sort of a feel for how they work. The modern ones will actually recognize the mouse and make the job a bit easier, but I'm going to give you a look at what you're more likely to be facing. Also, we're going to take a look at this CD that we've just created, because it's got a few different modes. As well as its primary task of installing Linux on your machine, it also gives you access to some tools which allow you to do things like run a memory check, which is quite useful for a dumpster machine because you want to make sure that it's going to be in working order. The last one is to use the CD as a live CD. That means that you can put it in and use the operating system without actually making any changes to your hard disk. Not only does it give you the freedom to have a look at how the operating system looks and how it feels before you commit to installing it, but it's also actually quite handy in case you need a rescue situation, because you'll have access to what is basically a fully fledged operating system. So that's coming up in part 3. See you then. Bye.